You notice it before you can name it. A man past 40 looks at a woman and says nothing about her face, her body, her outfit. He says something else entirely, something quieter, and she remembers it for years. Most people assume this is restraint or shyness, or maybe he simply didn't notice how she looked, but that assumption misses something important, something almost nobody talks about. What most people don't realize is that older men aren't avoiding the compliment about her looks. They are choosing something they consider more valuable to say. And once you understand why, you will never hear a compliment the same way again. Think about it. When you were younger, what did praise sound like? You look amazing. You're so beautiful. Words aimed entirely at the surface, at what can be seen in a single glance. They feel good for a moment. Then they fade because they were never about you. They were about your appearance, a thing you didn't build and can't fully control. Stay with me here, because this is where things become interesting. There are two words that men who have lived longer, who have loved longer, who have lost things and learned from the losing, tend to reach for instead. Two words that sound almost plain on the surface, but underneath carry a completely different message. We'll come back to those exact words. But first, you need to understand why so many men stop complimenting looks at all once they reach a certain point in life. Imagine this. A man in his 20s meets someone. He's drawn to her, and the first thing his mind reaches for is what he can see. Her smile, her eyes, the way she carries herself in a room. This isn't shallow, it's simply how early attraction tends to work. Attraction begins with the senses, because that's the only information available in those first few minutes. But give that same man 20 more years. Give him a failed marriage or a relationship that looked perfect from the outside and was hollow on the inside. Give him friendships that fell apart, children who taught him things he never expected to learn, mistakes he's quietly carried for a decade. Something shifts in how he sees people. He starts to notice that beauty, on its own, never kept anyone warm at 3 in the morning when life fell apart. He starts to notice that the people who stayed in his life weren't the ones who looked the best in a photograph. They were the ones who showed up, who told him the truth even when it cost them something, who carried weight without announcing it. This is where things become interesting, because this shift in perception changes the entire vocabulary a man uses when he speaks to a woman he respects. Consider the moment when an older man watches a woman handle something difficult. A hard conversation with a parent, a decision that cost her financially but aligned with her values, a moment where she could have taken the easy path and didn't. He's not thinking about her looks in that moment. He's thinking something closer to admiration. And admiration doesn't reach for the word beautiful. It reaches for something else. The deeper truth is this. Physical compliments are easy to give because they require no observation. Anyone can glance at a person for 2 seconds and comment on their appearance. It costs nothing. It requires no understanding of who that person actually is. But the two words an older man tends to use instead require him to have actually been paying attention. They require him to have watched how she handles pressure, how she treats people who can't do anything for her, how she carries herself when nobody is around to see it. Those two words are, you're solid. Not solid in the sense of size or shape, solid in the sense of dependable, grounded, real, solid the way a foundation is solid, the way something is solid when it doesn't crack under weight. Now we move deeper, because the meaning behind those two words goes further than most people initially assume. When an older man tells a woman she's solid, he is communicating something that took him years to learn how to value. He is telling her that she doesn't fluctuate with circumstance, that her character holds steady whether she's having a wonderful week or a terrible one, that he could call her at 2 in the morning with a problem and trust she would tell him the truth instead of what he wants to hear. This is not a small compliment. It is, in many ways, the highest compliment a person who has lived through disappointment can give, because what he's really saying is, I have been burned by people who looked perfect and turned out to be unreliable, and you are not that. You are something rarer. But before we go there, it's worth pausing on something most people overlook entirely. Why does this matter so much to the woman receiving it? Why does a compliment about reliability often land harder, stay longer, mean more than one about beauty? Picture yourself for a moment. Picture being told you're beautiful by 5 different strangers in a single week. It feels nice briefly, but does it change how you see yourself? Does it answer any question you've actually been asking internally? For most people, the honest answer is no. Beauty-based compliments don't address identity. They address surface. Now, picture being told by someone who has clearly been paying attention that you are solid, that you are the kind of person others can lean on, that your presence in someone's life makes things steadier instead of more chaotic. This lands differently because it answers a question almost everyone is quietly asking themselves. Am I someone worth trusting? Am I someone worth staying close to? There is something deeper happening here, and it has to do with how identity is built. Compliments about appearance reinforce something you already know and can verify by looking in a mirror. Compliments about character reveal something you often cannot see in yourself because character is observed from the outside through patterns of behavior over time. When someone tells you that you're solid, they are essentially handing you evidence about who you are that you didn't have access to on your own. This is why those two words, spoken sincerely by someone who has actually lived enough to understand the difference, can feel more meaningful than an entire evening of physical compliments. What happens next is important because there's a second layer to this that most people never consider. Older men don't just avoid praising looks because they value character more. They also do it because they understand something uncomfortable about beauty-based attention. It attracts people for the wrong reasons, and it fades, leaving the relationship with nothing solid underneath it. A man who has been in a relationship built primarily on physical attraction knows what happens when that attraction is the main foundation. The moment life gets hard, the moment stress shows up, the moment one or both people change physically or emotionally, the relationship has nothing else holding it together. He's lived through that collapse or watched a friend live through it, and he doesn't want to build anything that way again. So when he meets a woman and chooses to comment on her steadiness instead of her appearance, he isn't withholding a compliment. He's offering a different kind of attention altogether, the kind built to last past the version of her that exists today. This is where most explanations of this topic stop. But there's a deeper layer still, and this is the part that changes everything. The deepest truth is this. When a man calls a woman solid, he isn't only describing her, he's revealing what he's been quietly searching for his entire adult life, often without being able to articulate it. He's telling you what nearly broke him in the past and what he refuses to go through again. He's telling you, indirectly, what he believes love is supposed to feel like once the initial excitement fades. Steady, dependable, unshaken by small storms. In other words, those two words are not really about her at all. They're a confession about him, about what he's learned the hard way, about the version of love he now understands to be real, as opposed to the version he once mistook for real because it came wrapped in attraction. And this changes the entire question you should be asking. The question most people ask is, why didn't he compliment my looks? But that was always the wrong question, because it assumes appearance is the highest form of value a person can offer or receive. The deeper, more honest question is this: what kind of attention do I actually want to be remembered for? Do you want to be remembered as someone who looked good in a single moment, or as someone whose presence made another person's life noticeably steadier? Because here is what matters. The compliments that fade are the ones built on things that change. The compliments that stay with you for years, the ones you find yourself thinking about long after the conversation ended, are almost always the ones that saw something true about your character. If you've ever wondered why a simple phrase from someone who has lived a little longer affected you more than dozens of comments about your appearance, this is why. It wasn't a small compliment. It was someone handing you proof of who you actually are. If this opened something for you, there is much more beneath the surface of how people show love, attention, and respect once they've lived long enough to know the difference between what shines and what stays. Stay close. This understanding is only the beginning.